set if you could find somebody to go with who knows what they're doing. Because, I mean, I guess you could teach yourself how to do it yourself, but I think people will get frustrating because it takes a little more talent than maybe your average person would assume.
Absolutely, and I think it would be the safer bet to find someone to show you the ropes, and then that instantly opens up a whole new world of places you can travel without running into people that if it bothers you to run into people, there's a solution to not run into people. Yeah, and I know firsthand from many different friends who are always off trail. They are happy to take people with them and who want to learn the ropes of off trail travel, because it's different when you're hiking with someone versus always seeing people. So it's a different, people want their solitude, but even for people who are hiking off trail, they're not losing that solitude if someone comes with them. It's kind of a different type of solitude they seek. So I would encourage that same thing as well. So now going with the trails and what we're talking about. So you've built trails professionally in your life. In your mind, these trails, yes, the trails when they were cut, back in some of them in the 1800s and some not really at all. They weren't really meant for anything or other than just quick. We need a quick trail to the summit. Let's just quickly do this. So obviously the trails are going to be in rough shape, if that's how you want to call it. So in your mind, what is the fix if people are saying that the trails are in bad shape? So why are they in bad shape, and what would you say at this point is a way to fix it, or is it kind of, it is what it is, they are what they are at this point?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely correct. When trails were cut, there was no consideration for design because, I mean, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, hiking wasn't a thing. You would have a trail that maybe started out as access to a summit where maybe there was a survey station or maybe there was a good view that the locals knew about. And hey, the shortest distance is point A to point B. So you just cut it straight up the mountain, which they call the fall line. So it's going straight up the fall line. And that makes a good trail builder's hair stand on end. You never want to take it steep. So we have these poorly designed trails, but to be quite honest, there are trails still being laid out in the Adirondack Park, and it's clear that the person still does not know what they're doing. So I've seen some newer trails laid out. There's one outside of Long Lake that hooks up with the Northville Placid Trail, so you can go into Long Lake and resupply. And I was just like, who the hell designed this thing? It goes straight uphill. So some people haven't learned much in the past century and a half. They're still building these really steep trails right up the fall line, and eventually it's going to become a stream bed. So now we're at the point, we have all these trails, they're not designed correctly, and people ask this question, now what? What the hell are we going to do with these things? So the traditional approach is to harden the trail. And hardening this is how I started out as a trail builder in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It's a big Northeast thing, trail hardening. So you go in and you keep the original trail. You don't shut it down, you don't move it. And you harden it by placing a lot of water bars, usually made out of stone, sometimes made out of wood. And on the really steep parts, you put rock steps. Okay. But that's a total waste of time. And it's very interesting. When I was a young trail builder in the Northeast, that's all I did was harden trails. And then I started building trails out west and in the South. And I would tell trail builders, oh, this is what we do in the Northeast. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, why the hell would you try to harden a trail? It's a total waste of time and money because the trail is still too steep. So you can slow erosion, but there's no way that you're going to stop it. So I can give two good examples. So I just hiked the 100-mile Rainbow Trail. For 100 miles, I found one water bar, one across a 100-mile distance. And water bars aren't good. They're not a good idea. So obviously out here, they've embraced sustainable design. All right. So that's kind of what we do out here in the West, and that's what they do in the South. But then when you get to the Northeast, they do this hardening. So the other example I'll give of why hardening doesn't work, if you're a trail maintainer, and again, I did this in the White Mountains and I've done it in the Catskills and Adirondacks, I would maintain trails by cleaning out water bars. And so people are saying two contradictory things in the same breath. They'll say water bars work. And what they're saying is water bars scoot water off the trail. And that is true. They'll say, yeah, water bars work. And I go, well, don't you do maintenance? And they go, oh my God, yeah, I have to clean out all the water bars every year because they're full of sediment. And I'm like, well, then obviously the trail is still eroding. And you see this thousands upon thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of water bars throughout the Northeast are continually filling up with soil. That's because in addition to removing water bars and the way the trail is designed, it also is perpetually eroding. Hardening is a Band-Aid. Design is like surgery.
Well, that's a very good analogy to use. So what would you say is the solution to, like, let's take, I mean, there's so many different ranges. You have the Seward Range, the Santanoni Range, where the trails are rough. I mean, they're rough over there. Tabletop, oh, yeah. It's really rough. So at this point, what would you say is a solution, or is there even a solution?
Well, there is a solution, but there are two problems: time and money. And we never have enough time, and we never have enough money. And New York State is especially good at the latter one, right? They never have any money, which I get. And if I was making the state budget, look, I'm a guy who hikes all the time. Trails would probably be at the bottom of the list. I'd probably deal with homelessness, crime, opioid addiction, infrastructure, bridges, and stuff like that.
Sure.
Right? So trails, I'd kind of put at the bottom. So I get that New York State has priorities. But there's a couple steps we could take right off the bat. One, no new trails. It's ridiculous when people say, oh, well, we just need more trails to spread out the use. But all you're creating is more problems because, again, people are still building trails incorrectly. They're not of sustainable design. They're of what I call Northeast style design. So a moratorium on trails, no new trails. The Adirondacks has about 1,500 miles worth of trails. I mean, that's pretty hefty. And then, of course, you have off-trail travel, campgrounds. We have extensive facilities already, so no new trails. If we're going to try to, and I'm using little air quotes here, if we're going to try to fix a trail by hardening it, no, it's just, it doesn't work. It's not a long-term sustainable solution. So if they want to pick a really popular trail, like, hey, we've got this horribly eroded herd path up Santanoni, and a lot of people hike Santanoni. Okay, then it's going to take several years. I mean, it could take a decade to keep the old trail open while you build a new trail that gently snakes its way up the mountain. It's not going to exceed 10% grade. It's not going to exceed half of the steepness of the slope it's built into. It's not going to have water bars. It's going to have very minimal rock work, basically no rock work at all. And it's going to, again, take this very gentle path up the mountain. And it's probably going to take a couple miles, because if you think about it, if you're just going to make a straight shot up Santanoni, maybe it's 2 miles, 3 miles, something like that. But by gently snaking it up the mountain, now it's probably going to be like double that length. It could be 6 miles or something like that. And unfortunately, Northeast trail builders and people in the Northeast in general, yours truly included, aren't the most patient people. And that's some of the pushback against sustainable design, because it takes so long. So I'll give you an example. I hiked a 14,000 foot peak out here recently, and I hiked down on this stunningly beautiful, brand new, just perfectly built, sustainable trail. And I was so impressed. I got to the bottom and I said, hey, I bet the trail crew is camped around here somewhere. So I was like a stalker. So I found them and I said, hey, I'm a trail builder, yada, yada, yada. That's one of the best trails I've ever seen in my life. And they were really impressed. They were like, oh, thank you very much. I said, how long have you guys been working on that? It's 1.5 miles long. They've been there 6 years.
Wow. Jeez Louise.
So if you're going to do it right, it takes time.
Yeah,
so to finally answer your question, no new trails, and let's eventually, slowly but surely, over several generations, shut down the terribly designed trails and build them, replace them with sustainable design.
Oh, that sounds like a very good plan, especially, I mean, the mountains, everyone says the mountains aren't going anywhere. So you're right.
Hmm.
And that does realistically seem like that would be the approach to take, the long-term approach. Of,
Right.
I mean, if you want to do the high peaks, you start with the high peaks, or the popular mountains, as you said. But like, yeah, it does seem like action would have to be taken to make that decision that we're in this for the long haul. Generations being the key word in that.
Right. And there are many sayings in the out of doors, and of course there are many sayings in trail building. One of the trail building sayings is build it right, build it once. That's it. So if you think about it, every trail hardening project, you're building the trail for the second time,
Sure. Yeah.
when it could have just been done correct once.
If only those damn people in the late 1800s, early 1900s
If only.
had talked to
Yes.
you first. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't have the technology yet.
Not yet. Bummer.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's that's fascinating to know that. So why do you think, we obviously know where the trails came from around here, and you laid out pretty much how the trails are in the Northeast. So what's different about, let's say, out west and down south that you mentioned? I mean, do they have more money dedicated to trail work? Are the people just using the funds and the money that they do have in a different way, whereas the people in the Northeast aren't using it in that way to, the sustainable design? Why do you think it is that way down south and out west? Why are the trails better?
Very good question. And I love giving this answer because very few people are aware of this. Believe it or not, the short answer is trails in the South and out West are designed well because they had a lot of horses. So what would happen is in the Northeast, travel was done primarily in the olden days before the settlers showed up by birch bark canoe by the Indians. So you would travel down waterways because we have so many lakes and ponds and rivers in the Northeast. That's how you would travel. Now, horses were introduced in North America by the Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s. So we actually used to have like giant horses and camels. We had all these weird animals thousands and thousands of years ago. But horses are not native to the United States. They came over with the Spanish conquistadors, a couple got loose, and the rest is history. So down south and out west, they used horses as their primary form of travel. Now here in the Northeast, and maybe we'll talk about it later, this book I'm writing about settlers, even the settlers of European descent in the Northeast had very few horses. What they had was oxen. And oxen they would usually mainly use for logging and construction of mills and hauling heavy carts full of household goods and stuff like that. Horses never really caught on in the Northeast, and that's still true today. You never really see horses out in the Adirondacks, even on the horse trails. They're extremely rare. So if you have a horse, like people did in the West and the South, it can't go up and down a trail like trails in the Northeast. So your trail needed to be, as they say in the business, graded. You would have a gentle grade that the horses could go up and down. And those are also known as pack trails or stock trails or pack stock trails. So it's very interesting. If the Northeast was overwhelmed with horses and that's how we used, that was our form of transportation to get around the mountains, we would have likely started out, the earliest trails would have been graded.
That is a lot of knowledge you just told to us. That's but yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. But it's a shame that we haven't, I guess, caught on. And I'm sure many trail builders, if they hear this episode, they may be pulling their hair out and cursing both yours and my name right now. But that is fascinating information, and it makes perfect sense, perfect logical sense as to they built the trails that way out of necessity, more or less. Whereas here, we didn't have that necessity. We had to get to the top because, as you stated, people in the Northeast, we're not very patient. We need it now, and we need it now.
Yeah, there's a reason we have that term, a New York minute.
Yeah. I'm sure they love that out west in Colorado.
They do.
So there's so now that we've talked about the trails and we've had some very good information about kind of the whys of why our trails are how they are.